So we're going to be watching why Europe doesn't build skyscrapers by B1M.
Why aren't there many skyscrapers in Europe?
I don't know.
Despite being one of the most developed, densely populated, and economically prosperous continents, Europe has surprisingly few skyscrapers, particularly when compared to Asia and North America.
Yeah.
Of the 218 skyscrapers constructed on the continent to date, 66% of them are located in just 5 cities: London, Paris, Frankfurt, Moscow, and Istanbul. So why have other major European cities not embraced the skyscraper? How do they thrive without the significant inner urban space and floor areas that these clever structures provide? And is everything about to change in our increasingly urbanized world?
I'm not sure. Why Europe doesn't build skyscrapers, alright.
When
Something interesting?
skyscrapers first rose to prominence in the 19th century, first in Chicago and later in New York, many European cities were already firmly established, with grand historic buildings and public spaces that left little room for large new structures.
That is true.
Most of Europe's
They
cities around
developed
that
way
time
quicker.
were also more evenly zoned,
No, way
and were
earlier
not
than-
facing the high demand for floor space in key districts that typically drives high-rise development. Additionally, as the power and influence of North America began to grow, a cultural rivalry emerged between Americans who saw Europe's class system as outdated and Europeans who saw some American ideals as eroding traditions and the European way of life. As a result, each continent became wary of adopting the other's concepts. While North America aims to become the model for a new age, Europe sought to preserve its heritage. While this explains why skyscraper construction didn't initially catch on in Europe, it doesn't explain what has held the continent back since.
Post-war rebuild.
In the
This is
wake of
true.
the Second World War, many thought European cities would modernise and replicate the skyscrapers that were rising across North America. However, in Western Europe, where many cities lost landmark and historic structures, an overwhelming desire to restore what had been destroyed took hold. In addition,
Oh.
the lower population of Europe at that time meant that the demand for floor area that principally drives skyscraper construction wasn't there. As a result, modest structures replaced buildings that could not be saved or restored. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the expanding Soviet Union's rebuild effort consisted largely of mid-rise repetitive structures that sought to rehouse much of the population. It was during this time that Europe saw its first skyscrapers begin to rise, not in response to growth
Moscow.
and prosperity, but in an effort by the
Warsaw. Where
Soviets
is
to
that?
indicate their
Warsaw.
power and influence.
Brusselsization.
While Brussels has never constructed a true skyscraper, it is partly responsible for the lack of skyscrapers across the continent. Without any significant zoning regulations in place, the 1960s saw many buildings in the city demolished to make way for large, modern structures that had little regard for architectural or cultural value. Recognizing the damage this indiscriminate redevelopment was doing to the city, many prominent figures and architects coined the term Brusselization and lobbied to introduce new planning laws.
I mean, I think it's mostly because of culture in a way. Because if you look at, for example, Barcelona, where it's a city where every single block kind of is built the same throughout the entire city, if you put a skyscraper in the middle of that, it would just kind of ruin it. Because it is culturally how they look. And if I was a native of Barcelona in Spain, then I wouldn't want that changed at all. I think I would like it to stay the way it is because it is unique, and if you look at it from the sky, you can tell that it is Barcelona, Spain. You know that it is Barcelona because it is built a certain way. If you look at New York City with all those tall buildings, you can tell that it's New York City because of the skyscrapers that are in like Manhattan, the Empire State Building, which is a super famous building. If you look at buildings like the Burj Khalifa, you can tell what the cities are because it is the culture that they have built upon. The way that they look is because it culturally kind of fits them. So I wouldn't want that changed if I was in Barcelona or any of those countries. So I think these cities where you can kind of see that there's skyscrapers, but there's also old cultural style of housing. I don't know, I just think it kind of looks weird.
These regulations significantly limited the scale of new buildings and required historic facades to be restored and incorporated into new developments, preserving the cultural fabric of the city. The row in Brussels led to a general dislike for modern buildings across Europe, with many seeing them as bland or soulless. In response, numerous cities adopted similar regulations and set aside controlled districts, like Paris's La Défense, to keep high-rise development away from historic centres.
If we go back, if we put a skyscraper literally right next to the Eiffel Tower, that would just look absolutely horrible. Like this picture, it looks weird. So I think you should take the picture from the other side, but it does kind of look weird having a skyscraper right next to the Eiffel Tower. It would look horrible.
First century, attitudes around tall buildings were softening across the continent, as architectural trends moved away from box-like structures towards more unique designs, weird. And as the world became increasingly globalized. Since the early 2000s, major financial centres like London, Paris, Moscow, Istanbul and Frankfurt have seen several skyscrapers rise, as demand for commercial space in their centres has increased. By contrast, smaller European cities that have been experiencing more modest growth have turned their focus to the environment and improving living standards for citizens.
That's Milan? Look at that! I didn't know they had that. That looks kind of cool. Kind of looks like these buildings look so cool because they look like if something bad happened to like humanity and all the people died and then just the buildings were left off with plants growing on them. I think that this was what it would look like, and honestly I love it. It looks so cool.
In recent years, urban areas in Scandinavia and Central Europe have consistently ranked among the highest in the world for sustainability, happiness and well-being, while maintaining importance within their national economies. However, skyscraper construction in the cities of today is no longer driven purely by economic growth or the need for commercial office space. With 60% of the global human population set to be living in urban areas by 2030, residential skyscrapers are now rising in prominence, particularly across Asia and North America. As many
You know what else is fucking rising? The rent prices. It is so hard if you want to live in New York City to get some type of rent under 2K or like 1,800, 1,900 for a month. That is just kind of like the bare minimum you want to live like around Manhattan. Way too expensive in my opinion.
Rural-based industries become automated, millions are migrating into cities and major urban areas, driving significant demand for residential space that is often met with high-rise structures. Europe is not immune to this phenomenon, particularly in such a heavily globalized world, and with the continent's desire to keep up with the progress and economic growth of China and the US. As such, Europe could witness a skyscraper boom in the decades ahead.
I mean, you're gonna have to have them.
However, with entire urban centres now being declared historically significant, and with the desire to retain as much culture and architecture as possible rightly holding strong up to the present day, the unique challenge facing future skyscraper construction in Europe is all to do with the past.
Oh, look, that's what I was talking about in Barcelona. If you look at this whole neighborhood, all the houses kind of look the same from above. They're not really skyscrapers. Like every building is like not a small building regardless. It is pretty big. It's 5-6 stories or floors that you can live on. It's not 30 floors, but it's still a good amount of floors that looks good. And even if you see the background, you cannot see one single skyscraper. I also think it looks a lot better because now this cathedral, I think it's called the Sagrada Familia, something like that. I think this one looks a lot better now because it stands out throughout the whole city because it's so tall.
Is all to do with the past.
This looks beautiful. Amazing video, loved it, and honestly I would love to visit Spain. That is one of the things I want to do so bad. I want to visit Spain. Matter of fact, I would like to live in Spain. That is one of my goals, but yeah.